So today I want to talk about sleep. There's been a lot of chat recently about how poor sleep is connected with lots of chronic health conditions, from high blood pressure to diabetes to strokes and heart disease. There's very clear connection between having poor sleep and having one of these health conditions. But today I want to talk about one of the other really important elements of sleep, and that's the restorative function of sleep in terms of our emotional or mental health well-being. So I think a lot of times we think about sleep and we think of it as like a state of unconsciousness where, our body doesn't move very much and our brain is just sleeping and resting. But in fact, that's actually not really the case at all. And in some areas of the brain, there's actually more activity when we're sleeping than when we're awake. And it's very important that we're cycling through two types of sleep called REM sleep and non-REM sleep. And REM sleep is the dream sleep. And it's very important that we have this sort of very balanced proportion of those two types of sleep. And we know that if you don't get enough of the REM or dream sleep, that tends to happen sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, then we often don't wake up feeling so great, but also that tends to be the day that you're going to have a bad day and be a bit more emotional, or things are going to seem like they're going wrong for you. And have you ever noticed that if you've had a really traumatic or upsetting event happen, and then you go to bed and you actually do manage to have a night's sleep, that it's not like you wake up the next morning and you've forgotten about it. You remember all the details, and you remember with great clarity what exactly has happened in the situation. You do remember all the words that were said and what you said and they said, but actually some of the sting and the sharpness has been taken out of the whole situation. And that's because during the night, our brain has worked really, really hard to, I suppose, take the sharp edges of what's happened. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie. It's a kid's movie called Inside Out, and it's such a really great explanation in simple terms of what goes on in the brain and how memories are processed. And sometimes whenever people have very traumatic events and they're not sleeping well, it actually means that it's very, very hard for the brain to sort of file those memories away and allow that pain and emotion and sting to come out of that event that's happened. So I want you to think about sleep maybe a little bit differently. I think we all are quite aware that we're meant to be having this sort of 6 and 7 hours of sleep a night. And I think we all think about it as being a physical rest. But I think we need to remember that it actually is there for emotional repair as well. And there's that softer side of mental wellness that is so important. And if you're not having adequate sleep, then you're not going to actually feel at your best. We also know that there are many things that actually help sleep and many things that inhibit it. And certainly it's a chat for another day, but we know that lots of women will struggle with sleep in the perimenopause and menopause. And we're not going to talk about that today. We're just going to talk about general things that people can do to help their sleep. So one of the things is actually cooling your bedroom down. So they've actually done lots of research, and apparently the perfect temperature is about 18.5 degrees C. So it's probably a little cooler than you think it should be. And that can be sometimes challenging when you live somewhere like we do in Australia, but definitely having a cooler room. So your body has to drop its temperature about 1 degree to actually fall asleep. I think the other thing is, if I think back to the routines that I've had with my 4 children, we often had a real bedtime routine. And, we had a bath, and then we had stories and songs, and everything was really quiet. And I certainly would never have dreamt of letting my children, be playing and then 2 minutes later be sort of chucking them into bed or into their cot and expecting them to go to sleep. And yet that seems to be something that we're expecting ourselves to do. So we're often, doing quite stimulating things. We're watching Netflix, or we're scrolling on our phone, and our brain seeing all this imagery and consuming all this sort of content. And then we're just expecting, to lie down and somehow we're going to flick a switch and go to sleep. And the reality is that more and more of us are struggling to get to sleep. So, as I said, cooling your room, potentially having a shower that's on the cooler side just to help that drop in body temperature. And also making sure, obviously, that your bed's nice and comfortable. And the other thing is to try very, very hard, and this can be easier said than done, to blank your mind. So every time you have that very intrusive thought of, that thing you're worrying about, whether it's money or your job or your relationship or the conversation that you had earlier, is trying to keep bringing yourself back and trying to think of something very, very neutral instead. And I listened actually recently to someone who described a technique of taking yourself on a walk. Now, not literally getting out of bed and going on a walk, but in your mind, repeating a walk that you do frequently. So that may be on the near work, or your walk to the train station, or a walk along the beach, but just doing going through the motions and visualizing yourself walking on that walk. And that's been used in a lot of research, and they've shown that the next thing they remember is waking up the next morning. So that can be quite a good strategy to try and clear your mind of very concerning things. Another thing I talk to my patients about is trying not to have very sort of stimulating or emotional phone calls. So if you know that, a friend's having a tricky time, or that you're going to have a very stressful conversation, it's probably not a great idea to then think that you're going to go straight to bed afterwards. There's other really interesting research around having a clock in your bedroom, and really the research says that you shouldn't, because actually it doesn't really help you to know that it's 2:43 and you're still awake, and then it's 3:13 and you're still awake. It's actually very, very stress inducing. So in fact, it's probably a good idea not necessarily to have a clock in your bedroom. Ideally, and I will openly admit I am very guilty of this one, is having a phone in the bedroom is not a great idea. But if you must have your phone in your bedroom, I want you to think about using this one simple rule. You're only allowed to look at it if you're standing up. And as soon as you want to sit down or lie down, you have to put your phone back down and put it face down. And that's because, you will not stand and scroll at the side of your bed for more than about 5 minutes. You'll decide you're too tired and you're going to want to go and lie down. So I hope some of these little tips will help. I think we need to think about ourselves a little bit like we do whenever we're trying to get our babies and toddlers into a sleep routine. We need to create something of a sleep routine for ourselves. We need to be dimming the lights in our house. We need to be then having some dark time whenever we're actually trying to go to sleep. So not trying to go to sleep with a TV or lights on, if at all possible. We need to make sure that room's nice and cool, like I said. Try not to have the clock in the room, because it becomes a focus and you become really stressed if you can't go to sleep. If you can, try not to have your phone in your bedroom. But if you must have it, then you're only allowed to look at it if you're standing up. And that definitely, honestly works. And hopefully we also will all take on board that sleep is so much more than just a physical rest for our arms and legs and our bodies. And it's so much more than our brain just, being this sort of blank, inactive space. It's actually a time that we need to set aside. It's restorative. It allows our brain to process a lot of the day's events and allows us to file those memories and experiences away in the correct way so that they don't become an ongoing trauma or concern. Hopefully this helps, and hopefully you'll maybe have a better night's sleep if you try some of these tips. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or other professional advice. Information is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you have any health concerns, always consult your doctor.